So this morning I'm going to talk about what it is, or the importance of taking sort of leadership in our own lives. Because I do think that there's this sense in which we're all called to be leaders. And how does that happen? And I'm not talking about sort of leading a company or a movement or a nation. I think it's way more important than that, actually, because we've each been trusted with what I call our own unrepeatable life, our unique life. And we're called to take leadership in that. And I think the tragedy of, for example, that adaptation that we call people pleasing is that we spend much of our time handing that leadership away to others. And we don't do it because we're weak. It's not because we're foolish, because it's more like somewhere along the line we learned that it's just safer to outsource leadership to external authorities than it is to trust ourselves, to speak with our own voice, to show up fully in our lives. And so when we talk about people pleasing, it's not just a matter of being nice or good, or accommodating. It's the quiet surrender of leadership. It's allowing everybody else's approval, their expectations, their disappointments, their demands to become our compass. And then I navigate my life according to their compass. It's like everybody else becomes the CEO of my existence. So we find ourselves asking questions, not consciously, but unconsciously, like, what do they want? What's going to make them happy, really, which is, how do I make sure they love me? What's going to keep the peace here? What won't disappoint them? I mean, there's all kinds of questions, but we're less likely to ask the question, what do I know is true for me? What is my life asking of me right now? What does love require of me? And that includes love of self, obviously. And this doesn't happen only psychologically. It happens culturally, politically, scientifically. The whole thing with Fauci right now, whether you stand with him or against him, is all about the authority of science, I think, and how we're willing to outsource our authority. We especially are seduced by those who seem certain, or they're confident, who promise to relieve us from the burden of uncertainty and from the burden of having to go within, do our own research, feel into it, intuit into it, feel our gut instinct. And, I'm not saying that expertise doesn't matter. It does. If I have to have surgery, I want an expert surgeon. And if I'm flying to some overseas destination, I want the pilot to be an expert, and then be better than I will ever be at that. But that's not what I'm talking about here. Listening to others' expertise is not what I'm talking about. It's when we give others the authority to affect our capacity to think and make our own decisions. It's when we stop seeing with our own eyes and hearing with our own ears. We stop trusting what our own experience is telling us. And that distrust was set up early in our lives when we learned that to trust our own experience and to speak our truth was to be on the receiving end of shame. And so we just like that, what I'm feeling, what I want to say can't be true. It's unspeakable. And it's important to realize that historically, institutions themselves, those very institutions we often cede our authority to, can actually become blind or are themselves subject to groupthink, to the crowd, whether it's government, churches, academia, the media, medical establishments, corporations, political parties. None of them are immune to this, or even therapists. Everything has its own blind spots, and everybody is subject to sort of mass consensus, the consensus that comes to the crowd. And so we have to look at all these various so-called authorities, and basically the evolution of the human species could be told in terms of the fall of one authority after the other, but then in its place somebody else. The shaman is replaced by the priest is replaced by the scientist and the politician, because there's something in us that wants somebody to know, somebody to be certain. So it's one of the highest responsibilities of a human being to be able to discern for ourselves, to make our own decisions, to take leadership in our own life. And this is what I think of as the heart self. And I don't think of this as just another part of us. It's actually the you of you. It's the place from which your genuine leadership, how you orient in life, comes from. It's not that it's certain, it's not that it wants to dominate, it's not into power, not at all. It's quite the opposite. But it is the place from which leadership arises. Because if you're in your heart, it's not asking, check this out for yourself, but it's not asking like, who agrees with me? Do you agree with me? Do you like me? Am I okay? It's asking what is true. What is beautiful for me? What is actually good in my own experience? It's not asking, what's fashionable? Who should I follow? But as I was talking about, it listens to the gut. It listens to intuition. It pays attention to our lived experience. It's the source of wisdom versus knowledge. And then, once we have that gut instinct and the intuitive capacity is online and we are courageous enough to speak our truth, then, we can bring reason on board, think about it critically, or think critically for ourselves. And I think the heart self is where it's all kind of comes together. I started this series in the monthly offering I do on the school platform, Just Be You. But I've added a whole section of videos, and I'm adding to it week by week. It's called Heroes Who Live Their Own Life. And, immediately one thing becomes obvious. The people that I want to write about and am inspired by, it's not like they agree with all the other heroes in it, not at all. So I'm thinking about, Socrates, Jesus, the Buddha, Thoreau, Kierkegaard, Nietzsche, Emmanuel Levinas, Carl Jung. They all hold different worldviews for sure, different maps of reality, if you like. But none of them outsourced the way they saw the world, what they heard for themselves. Each refused, they did their own research. And then if it veered from consensus reality of their various fields, that didn't bother them. They wanted to look directly at reality for themselves. And if it meant standing apart from the crowd, so be it. It always means standing apart from the crowd. But we remember these people precisely for that, for their boldness. So you look at a guy like Thoreau, and we all remember him for Walden's Pond, but he isolated himself. Not that far from civilization, actually. It was about a couple miles, mile and a half, but he built himself a cabin and lived out there. But I don't think that's the critical thing. He wanted to find out for himself what constituted a successful life, because when he was living in the city among all the people hustling and bustling and getting on with their lives, he just didn't feel it. He just said, is this reality? I don't feel it. So off he went. And so there he practiced direct perception of what actually matters. He said, and this is a quote, "I went into the woods because I wished to live deliberately, not accidentally, not by default to convention, not according to inherited expectations." He wanted to discover what constituted a real life for him. The other person I want to write about is Johann Wolfgang Goethe, von Goethe. And totally different field. He was like one of the earliest scientists, but there was already sort of a scientific academia that, there was agreeing upon the way the world was constructed. But Goethe said, I'm going to look at this for myself. And he came up with what he called exact sensorial imagination, which meant he spent a hell of a lot of time just paying attention to what a plant, for example, or the light spectrum was actually doing. And he came up with his own conclusions, many of which stand up today. Exact sensorial imagination, trusting his own senses to say, how does this plant actually grow? I know what they say is happening, but when he looked for himself, he saw something completely different. He saw, for example, deep intelligence in plants like 300 years ago, 400 years ago. So we got to look with our own eyes. I think when Jesus says something, or I'm always using Jesus, but take Job in the Hebrew scriptures. He suffered immensely, one thing after another. His life was miserable. He was stripped of all his possessions, even his family. And his friends came along and told him why this was happening. And he said, horseshit. The priests came along. All the authorities lined up to tell him what he had to do, how he had to repent. And he said, that's bullshit. That's bullshit. That doesn't resonate with me. And finally, he had a direct experience of God. And the last lines in the book of Job are, now the eyes of my eyes are opened. Now I hear with my own ears. He did his own theology, if you like. It's not that he was rebellious or he wasn't contrarian. That's another adaptation. That's just another form of dependence on the other. But the heart isn't reactionary. It's free. It just asks, well, what's true? I know what the crowd says. That's okay. That's okay. But what's my experience? Or if you actually go to Jesus, he has those with ears to hear, let them hear. With ears to hear. And now what's been told to you by the authorities? What are you actually hearing? What are you actually seeing? So, when I talk about the spiritual journey, I don't think primarily it's becoming a better person, about becoming a good person. That may be a side effect, but that's not what it's about. It's about trusting your inner wisdom sufficiently to lead your own life. And it's not about perfection or being infallible. It's just being honest, being responsible, being courageous. And of course, this is going to goes against my sort of the mandate of my survivor self, right? Because I have to outsource all of that just to just to survive, just not to be punished, not to be humiliated. But we're talking about something different here. We're talking about the leadership of the heart. And I just want to end by saying, like, when I'm talking about heart self or leadership like this, don't start to think, oh God, there's another self-leadership is another ideal. I have to try harder to get into my heart self, because, you know, I say this repeatedly, but it bears repeating, because when we listen to other people like this, it's often we're listening from our ego or the survival self. But the heart self is something that we already are. So it's more a matter of relaxing into it. It's not something that we have to strive towards or anything like that, because when we do that, we're still in ego. So this is a matter of dropping in, relaxing, trusting our own inner experience, learning to see with our own eyes, to hear with our own ears, and then orienting from that perspective. It's not anti-authority, it's pro-Bruce, pro-Susanna, you know, think of it more like that. So this week, when maybe you're looking out in the world and you're interacting, like, maybe the practice is to try to just notice the question that comes up from the survivor self. What are they going to think of me? And replace it with what's true for me. Not what is going to confirm that I belong to this crowd, but what's actually true for me. What, even if it requires me to, you know, retreat to the woods, to go into solitude, to stand apart from the crowd. So heart self, inner authority, self-leadership.